All right, so welcome back to the development unit. We've talked about the themes and methods of development, and then we talked about physical development across the entire lifespan from womb to tomb, right? And so you guys studied about gender and sexual orientation for 3.3. And that leads us to cognitive development, which is of the mind, right? So we're talking about problem solving ability and perception. So things that have to do with our cognitive thinking ability. And so that development across the lifespan. You may have seen something in the physical section and even in your vocab about habituation as sort of our physical development section as an infant. Habituation is the idea that a baby learns and that we can actually tell that a baby learns even though it can't speak to us because they divert their attention away from an object. So once they're bored with something, their mind goes away from it. It's called habituation. And so that's like some of the first sort of aspects of cognitive development. And we're going to talk about cognitive development, especially with John Piaget, the famous psychologist, and how he studied it and what he came up with. All right, so let's start with Piaget. He is a Swiss psychologist, and he actually studied his children, and he gave them these little tasks in a classroom, right? And he just was asking them if they could solve these certain problems or tasks that were, sort of important mental capabilities. And what he discovered was that at certain ages, we were capable of the mental ability to accomplish certain tasks. And so he came up with the stages of cognitive development, like these different stages and what mental milestones happen during those stages and what we're able and capable to do during those stages. So that was his big sort of contribution to cognitive development was he proposed stages. Now, even though he did propose stages, um, he believed that we used our schemas, right? And they were constantly developing. And we would also then sometimes level up our schemas, our understanding of the world by a process where we tried to assimilate new things into it. And if those new things didn't fit in, then we would accommodate. So, he came up with these stages of development. And even though they are stages, one of the things that we really want to talk about is that, like, in retrospect of Piaget's research, we've discovered that a lot of these accomplishments are happening much faster and then what he labeled, which gives us a really good insight that our development may be more continuous than stage related. So even though we propose it and lay it out in stages, in reality, in our life, we develop continuously. And maybe the evidence of that is that a lot of these ages or age groups in which Piaget says we accomplish some of these mental milestones have been proven to occur much faster in humans. So that's one of the things we have to think about when we talk about it. All right, so we talked about Piaget thought that we modified our schema and we formed our schema through processes of assimilation and accommodation. So his idea of schema was our sort of understanding of the world. And we did this understanding and organized it through categories based on, our prototypes. So these concepts that were based on prototypes. And he said that once we come across something brand new, right, that we try to assimilate that new information into what we have existing. So an example is if we have a schema for a four-legged pet being a dog, right, and we saw a new looking dog, right, that fit all of the qualifications of our prototype and made it fit into our concept, then we would assimilate that new dog into our mind and understand it as a dog, right? Or the opposite was if our schema for a pet is a dog and we come across a cat and we try to assimilate that information, but it doesn't fit into the dog category, then we accommodate or change our schema to fit the new world, the new information we've gotten from our world. So if he came across the cat, he would realize that the cat is not a dog, not all four-legged animals are dogs, so now he has to come up with a four-legged pet category for cats. All right, so let's continue on and actually focus on the stages that Piaget had provided for us. The first stage is sensory motor, and it's like exactly what the name insinuates. And if you can look at the picture up there with the kid in the phone, every infant explores their world through their senses, and the sense they like to use the most is their mouth. They will pick up anything off the ground and put it in the mouth. So the child is understanding the world in terms of all of the actions that they do and like the senses that they experience, not words, because they don't have that mental capability yet. One cognitive milestone that they do start to achieve, and this could happen around 6 months or even earlier, is object permanence. The idea that things exist even when they're not in front of you. So the game Peekaboo, where you cover your eyes and then you open them and the child just thinks it's amazing because that infant actually thinks that you disappear when you close your eyes, that you don't exist without you being around them. But when you open your eyes, they're amazed to see you there again and you existing in their world. So about, a little while into this sensory motor stage, the infant's going to be able to understand that objects exist, right, even when they're not in their world, which will relate to their social development when they come up with stranger danger, right? When they start to realize that the person that's holding them is not their mother and that their mother is somewhere else, even though they can't see them. All right, the next stage is pre-operational. Okay, so this is toddler through early childhood. And this is when children are starting to use mental symbols and engage into pretend play. So we are starting to literally match up pictures, right, of objects and understand what they are, right? We can actually sort of draw them. Well, we can't draw them necessarily great, but we could discuss them. We could talk about them. We could attempt to draw them, especially in our early childhood. This also leads to pretend play. And this is sort of like a fantasy or make believe play that really starts to engage roles that we know, such as mom and dad, brother, sister, teacher, student, doctor, patient, all of those type of fantasy plays that sort of teach us about to understand our world. So this mental objects and pictures and symbols and then pretend play, these things are starting to be the way that we engage in our world. That also sort of the idea of animism, which kind of is strange when it comes to mascots and stuffed animals and cartoon characters. They believe that there's like some life in some lifeless objects, right? And they believe these objects have intentions, desires, and feelings, right? Because they don't understand that yet mentally. And they're also in an egocentric world. They're still stuck in the perspective of themselves. They can't literally see something from another person's perspective. They can't put themselves in someone's shoes. So if they were literally caught with their hand in the cookie jar and their mother said, "Did you take a cookie?" They're going to answer no, not because that they did because they didn't realize that the mom saw them, right? That's the reason why they're going to say no, and that their intention is they don't want to get in trouble. So the world revolves around them, and they would say no because that is what their intention is, and they have no sort of awareness that they were literally seen by their mom. Um, eventually, eventually at this stage, maybe later on, they're going to get the principle of conservation. And conservation is this idea that the mass, volume, or the number of something can stay the same despite the forms of the objects changing. So the tall, skinny glass and the short, stubby glass. If you take two short, stubby glasses and show the child that they have the same amount of juice, and then you take one of the stubby glasses and you pour it into the tall glass has liquid that goes up higher. The stubby glass has it up shorter but wider. The child might pick the tall glass as the one that has more liquid because they haven't gotten the principle of conservation. But at some point in time during this pre-operational stage, the child will be able to understand conservation and be able to determine that the liquid is the same in both glasses. Also, the idea of reversibility will come, that they can reverse sequences, right? Restore something to its original state. And math is very important because they can reverse the processes like adding and subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. So these skills, these mental abilities will eventually show up in early childhood. Another big sort of milestone is theory of mind. And this is the ability to sort of attribute mental states, such as your beliefs, your wants, your intentions to do, the knowledge that you have about yourself, right? The idea that you understand this is a mental state of your own, and that other people may have mental states, and those mental states could be different than yours. So mom could be mad at you, right? When you could be sad that you did something wrong. And you could understand those two different mindsets. So a child that doesn't have theory of mind is egocentric, and then eventually in this pre-operational stage, they will achieve theory of mind where they can understand and their own mental state, and also acknowledge that others have mental states, and that those mental states can differ, that their perspective can be different from ours. All right, that leads us to the third stage of Piaget, which is concrete operational. All right, so this is where they can get, understanding in a logical, realistic, tangible world. Objects that they can see and manipulate, math problems that they can do with their hands, logical thought, understanding jokes and punchlines. These things all come. So they have the skills of conservation, reversibility. They have logical thought. They can think in algorithms in systematic ways, right? They have multiple abilities to just connect information. So we're getting into a higher level of thought, but not the highest level of thought yet for Piaget. The highest level was formal operation stage, the last stage. And this is from late childhood through adulthood. And people in this stage, they are categorized by having these two abilities, abstract thinking and hypothetical reasoning, right? And he actually thought that not all adults actually, or even, older children actually achieve this. Some of that was due to disabilities, like people with learning disabilities have ceilings on their mental capabilities. Other reasoning for it was like culture. Some cultures don't value the abstract or hypothetical because their worlds are more tangible and real, such as places that survive off the land, right? So those things might not be important. So not everyone achieved this type of thinking, but obviously all students in American high school system who are taking AP classes have gotten to the level of formal operation. Abstract thinking is our ability to sort of understand concepts and patterns and principles that's not tied to something that's actually seeable. So algebra is abstract thinking. The idea that there's letters in a math equation, right, leads to the ability to solve a problem mathematically with letters, right, which is not something that kids in the concrete operational stage can do yet. They can't use this abstract connection that a letter represents a number or a possible number in an equation. The other is hypothetical reasoning. And these are what if then scenarios, right? So like what if outside there was no gravity at all except for at your vehicle, and you had to leave the school with gravity to get to your vehicle, and in between there's zero gravity. Now in real life that's not the sequence, and you don't even have to worry about that, and so therefore you wouldn't need to solve the problem. But for fun and for the ability to sort of think higher level, people with hypothetical reasoning are able to come up with solutions like, oh, I would propel myself with a fire extinguisher, so if I didn't go in the right direction, I could reverse it and get to my vehicle. Those type of things. People who play video games, obviously in a hypothetical world where they're able to solve or complete their missions, is an example of formal operation. All right. Another aspect of learning that's outside, or cognitive development that's outside of Piaget, is Lev Vygotsky. And he was talking about our cognitive development, right, through social cultural context, that we are social learners and that we interact with other people, and people within our social cultural context can scaffold, can like give us support that builds our learning. And learning occurs when we are in the proximal development zone. So we're somewhere near each other in this development zone. And this includes play with our peers and our parents, right? And obviously our interactions with our instructors. So this idea of the zone of proximal development, as you can see there to the right, he thought that there were two processes. One, that being in this arena, there's like you provide them something what the learner can do. You understand what the learner can do. Then you give them something that the learner can do with help, hoping that it starts to expand eventually what they can do alone, right? And then on the outside of that is what they cannot do yet. And so you're always trying to expand the center to reach the outside, right? And it's always this interaction with people in that black zone, that help zone, that start to expand the capabilities of our cognitive development. So teachers, right, should be in that zone. Parents are in that zone. Our older siblings are in that zone, and even our peers, our friends, can be in that zone. Now, scaffolding is like the support that we give to help them to reach what they cannot do yet. So here we are in the pink, trying to reach the middle, trying to reach the outside, darker pink, right? What we cannot do, and we can only do that with help. But the scaffolding that we get, right, might be more intense at the beginning while we're learning the skill, and then that scaffolding, that support, that help, right, gets pulled away. So an example of scaffolding is if I was asking you to write a paragraph and I gave you sentence stems for every sentence to complete the paragraph, and all you had to do was complete each sentence, and then your paragraph would be complete. That is an example of scaffolding. Well, what if then I pull, that to just like a couple of words of each sentence, and then you have to finish, or then I just give you the letter that I would begin each sentence with, and then you had to finish it, and then eventually you had to do it with no help at all. So scaffolding is just support, right, that sort of gets you to that thing that you cannot do yet. And it's super important that the scaffolding evolves as your skill gets a little bit better. You pull back that scaffolding to keep forcing them to grow to what they cannot do yet. Okay, so that leads us to our adulthood. And just like physical development, it's a sad story for people like me in the adulthood when it comes to our cognitive development. One aspect of our cognitive development is our cognitive capabilities, our crystallized intelligence versus our fluid intelligence. And remember, crystallized intelligence, that is our storage, our vault. And it actually grows all the way through adulthood and remains pretty stable. So our ability to solve crossword puzzles and remember vocabulary grows because it's like a vault of knowledge through experience. And it doesn't really get that much decay, and it stays pretty stable. The issue, though, is our capabilities of fluid intelligence, and that is our ability to solve problems on the fly and be more reactive in our sort of reasoning, right? Faster processing. And this is what tends to wane or goes down as people age. And one aspect of that is the idea that we're afraid of elderly drivers because their fluid intelligence is lower or has declined, and they're not capable of reacting as fast as they used to. All right, so the last thing we really have to address when we talk about cognitive abilities and development in adulthood is dementia. Now, dementia generally is just a pervasive and like ongoing deterioration of our memory in at least one area of cognitive ability, such as our language, our executive function. But it can be due to a variety of causes. It can literally be because of a disease like Alzheimer's disease, right? Or it can be because of just normal aging processes. So the more important thing is that its variance in severity can really determine how much of an impact it has on someone's daily function and in their ability to have a job or even interact socially. And sometimes they can lead to an isolated life because of the inability to be able to remember or connect with other people. All right, that's it. Cognitive development is done, except for we haven't talked about language. And we're going to do language in just a bit. So I'll see you on the other side.